So I'm honored to have a good colleague. You've heard a little bit from Andy Mason, but I do think because agroforestry, a lot of what we're doing today is trying to work a bit from the bottom up. We want to work with educators to work at the grassroots level, but the impact of policy, the impact of things that they can do out of state and federal government can be profound, and it could be profoundly positive. So it's nice to know what's going on and what the thinking is. So I'll stop, and I'll let Andy be profoundly positive about it.
Oh, God. What a way to finish the day, huh? Somebody from Washington, D.C.
No, we're not done yet. We're going to talk about windbreaks, but that'll be with dinner.
Thank God. Where is this?
That's your
Which button?
Oh, that's your phone.
So, and it is late in the day, so I'd really like to hear from you. Stop me. I may stop and ask you questions just because I don't want to talk at you this late in the day. I know how it is. But I think it is true, at least paraphrasing what I think Mike said, is if you're in this game of agroforestry, which I assume you all are, you're here this week, and since you're going to call yourselves agroforesters at the end of the week, you really do need to take an interest on what's going on more broadly, particularly in the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I don't know how you can avoid it. I mean, I think getting it right on the ground is absolutely right technically, but I tell my bosses this. I said, agroforestry is not just a program, it's a movement. There's a movement, there's a trend, there's some energy behind it. So it isn't just about a practice. At least that's my view from DC, but I'll tell you more. So I'll tell you a little bit about the importance of agroforestry at USDA, why I think it's important. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this framework, which many of you are well aware of, but there's copies of this here, the USDA Strategic Framework. It's not that hard to read. If you haven't read it, gaze at it, or at least look at the roadmap page. It's a pretty simple strategy. I think anybody that's in agroforestry ought to have, the basics of what's in that in the back of their minds. I really do. We've been working on this report about agroforestry, the first one ever across the department. I wish I could tell you it was out. I thought it was going to be out 6 weeks ago. And stuff in DC just doesn't happen sometimes the way you think it would. Bruce, I thought it'd be done before you retired. Well, that would have been a dream. And then I'm going to finish here if I don't, we don't throw me out of here before that. I just came up with some things that I think need to happen to take it to the next level. And these things are not just DC, they involve you and others. So this wonderful woman, the Deputy Secretary of Agriculture, Kathleen Merrigan, who I'm sorry to say left USDA at the end of April, she got it big time. She could spell agroforestry without putting a hyphen in the middle of it. She connected it to her passions, local food, organic ag. She kicked off a workshop that we had 3 years ago where we had stakeholder input to do this. And this was a quote of hers, which I think is good, which is great. Came to this perspective that we have underthought, underutilized agroforestry as a strategy for diversification, but now the timing is right. She, for many years before she came to the Obama administration, she actually worked in the Clinton administration, but she took a time out and worked at Tufts University up near Boston. And she used some of the Working Trees brochures from the National Agroforestry Center. She couldn't figure out why agriculture and forestry were separated. And her students would ask her this, and she'd get into these dialogues. So she was thinking about agroforestry before she came and became the deputy secretary. But the secretary, who's still there, Tom Vilsack, he even uses the A word. And he did it recently, kind of at the end of a sentence. But this was it. Hey, it was there, and it was a big room. He was at the plenary for the Ag Outlook Forum, which had I don't know if any of you were there. I mean, it attracts thousands of people. And after that, people came up to me, did you hear the secretary said agroforestry? I said, yeah, I heard it. But he got onto this thing about multicropping. And before this conference, I was called in with some others to put together some briefing papers on multicropping. And I don't know where, somehow he said, this is a good strategy. We need to talk about multicropping. And so, cripe. No, that was Bruce had left by then. It was somebody else. It was Eric Norland and I were saying, well, cripe, that's alley cropping, silvopasture. So we generated some papers, and then, so this is good. He's talking about multi-cropping, a strategy for managing risk, whether it's double cropping, cover crops, integrated crop livestock, or even agroforestry. So this is good. So, you know, we got people at high levels saying the right things. Here's Bruce and I are flanking Deputy Merrigan 2 years ago when we released this strategic framework with some fanfare down in Athens, Georgia at the North American Agroforestry Conference. This was developed by an interagency team. 5 USDA agencies and state foresters were involved in conservation districts, so that was pretty cool. 90 stakeholders. Nicola McPherson was one of our speakers at the kind of the inaugural seminar. What's the purpose of the framework? Increase awareness and support for agroforestry, identify future emphasis areas for research, tech transfer. 3 very simple goals. I think these are really elegant. Adoption, adoption, adoption is goal 1. There's a reason goal 1 is adoption. You know, we got to increase use of agroforestry by landowners and communities. Science, the second goal. We know we need to advance the science, the understanding, the tools. Shabu told us that. We've come a long way, but we got a ways to go. Integration really is a nice word for get agroforestry institutionalized in USDA. Get it into its vernacular, its being, its programs. So that's really that's kind of an internal goal. And we're working on that. There's 9 objectives in there. The first one, of course, very applicable to us here this week, educate professionals. Enable professionals to provide the technical, educational, financial, and marketing assistance. You heard about marketing some. Huge. Hugely important. Well, not only do we have a strategy, and so many strategies back in DC and maybe in your offices go on shelves, never be seen again, we actually have a committee that's implementing this thing. So that's pretty cool. We have a committee that now has 8 agencies on it. We have executives from those 8 agencies and then a bunch of worker bees like me that help them do what they endorse. You know, we pick out some of the priorities in here, and one of those are the handout. Did you guys get the handouts? Yes. You should have this departmental regulation in front of you. This is some of the stuff you do in DC. Some of it isn't very pretty, it takes a while, there's a lot of wordsmithing, and about 100 people got to review it. But when you do a departmental regulation and you get it issued, it gives some life to something. And this thing has a life of 5 years. So there's never been a regulation in the department about agroforestry. Basically what we did is we just kind of took the keywords and turned it into a regulation. It's on the web. If you Google that thing, you should find it. We completed a communication plan. We intend very soon here to have some enhanced web pages on USDA about agroforestry. You can go to the National Agroforestry Center, of course, that's been there for years. We're planning to have some web pages that highlight the work of the 8 agencies. So not just NAC, not just Forest Service, NRCS. And I mentioned this report. We're working on this report. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. It's in press. Here's the steering committee. I mentioned it. All these agencies are involved. This is kind of cool. National Ag Statistics Service. They're the ones that do the Census of Agriculture. Any of you that are producers, did you send in your Census of Ag? Good for you. When were they due?
Way back in February, I think.
Yeah, okay, all right. I'll tell you a little bit about that. Bruce, I don't know if you knew this, Wayne Honeycutt is our current chair, Deputy Chief NRCS. So So this report, just a couple findings. Mike alluded to them. You see the dollars there. There's actually two reports that are going to come out. One's very comprehensive, very technical, lots of numbers and statistics and all that kind of stuff. And then there's an in-brief version that's going to be told more through case studies, producers doing agroforestry, more plain language. So I think that's pretty cool the way it's going to come out. I hope we can just, when it comes out, maybe we can send the link out to the class. And we've actually got an inbox set up where you can send comments about these reports. It's going to come to me. So we'd like to hear from people. But Mike mentioned the trillions of dollars in the federal budget. Well, in these 2 years, 2011 and 12, we estimate there was about $333 million invested in agroforestry related activities across the Department of Ag. This report has 15 case studies in it. It's organized around the strategic framework, and pretty importantly in the report we identify 15 next steps. What do we think we really need to do in the next several years? Okay, let's look at inside that 333 million a little bit. It's less than 1% of all of USDA's financial obligations those 2 years. So it's pretty small. About 95% of that $333 million supported technical and financial assistance to help landowners apply practices through USDA programs. And very, very much dominated by riparian forest buffers and windbreaks. Only about 1% of that money went to alley cropping, forest farming, and silvopastures. So maybe you all knew this. I think I had a sense of it, but I didn't know the degree to which this is the case. They're just not, yes?
This is funneled through EQIP largely?
Largely EQIP and also CRP.
Okay.
Yep, so the primary programs, so yeah. And a lot of debate about whether is CRP, Mike and I have talked about this, are these really agroforestry practices, CRP in particular? Well, CRP, it doesn't really allow active management, but it is an investment in trees into agricultural land, and those pine plantations in the south, that CRP helped establish, they certainly could be converted to silvopastures. They perhaps forest farming. So it's a lot of debate. That's where we ended up. We decided, yes, we're going to count them as investments. And EQIP is different. Those are working lands conservation programs. Well, what about this other, the other 5%, $15 million? Well, it's kind of roughly distributed this way. Agroforestry Research, Education, and Extension, ARS, through about 7 labs, about $4 million. Forest Service, about $3 million, including the National Agroforestry Center. NIFA programs, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, the funds that they send out through McIntyre Stennis and other programs to universities. And then through the Forest Service, through, some of you know maybe about the Forest Stewardship program. There's funds that Tracy does, I'm quite sure. Funds that go through the Forest Stewardship program certainly in some states support planning, at least, of agroforestry practices. And a little bit of money was reported by Ag Marketing Service and Rural Development in support of agroforestry. I'm going to look just a little more at the goals, each of the goals in the report. You probably know this, but in case you don't, there is really no national database of agroforestry plantings out on the landscape, nor is there currently any information about the landowners that are applying agroforestry practices other than what we know about that's funded through the Farm Bill programs. There's, again, a large number of acres of riparian forest buffers, windbreaks, a little bit of alley cropping. This is in 5 years, not 2 years. In 5 years, about 2,000 acres of silvopasture reported through USDA assistance programs, I think almost entirely EQIP, and only about 500 acres of forest farming. So there are people doing these things without USDA assistance. We just don't know how much. You know, you heard Nicola, she's obviously doing forest farming, and others, and she's got some USDA assistance, but I don't think that may have been captured here. Okay, so regarding who's doing agroforestry, this is pretty cool. The Census of Agriculture, those that did the census, do you remember seeing this practice question? Who did the census this year? Do you, by any chance, this practice question is in there. At any time during 2012, did this operation practice alley cropping or silvopasture as an integrated agroforestry system? Do you remember? I'm just curious. I don't know how long the census is.
I was surprised to see it.
You were surprised?
I don't remember seeing
Would a
it.
non-landowner have probably skipped over that then?
Well, if it's a producers get them. So you have to, if you qualify as a producer, you would have gotten it. So what's cool about this is, for the first time ever, NASS, the agency that runs the census, they're going to have data in, they estimate, February 2014. So we'll be able to see who answered yes and no, and that gives us the potential to do follow-up surveys with those two populations. So we can find out something about who, where. So this is, of course, way beyond just you getting assistance through USDA programs. This would be information about anybody that's doing it just on their own as a business. Yes?
Didn't ask on with that question?
Well, we worked with NASS, and Doug was when Doug was our agroforester, he did a lot of the negotiating on the wordsmithing. So I had an initial meeting with the NASS folks. They were very agreeable to this, and they basically said to me, okay, you get one question and we need it now. And this was like 3 years ago. And then after Doug worked, you know, I don't know if you want to say anything, Doug.
Well, our original agreed-to sentence didn't quite read like this.
Yeah.
But after it went out as a test question with some, I don't know, focus.
Yeah.
We made some adjustments in this.
Right.
Did you have to negotiate capitalizing agroforestry?
You know, that might have been my mistake, but I think it was capitalized, but I'm not sure. Yeah, as long as there wasn't a hyphen in the middle, I was happy. You know, so that's pretty. I mean, this is a foot in the door. You know, to get into the Census of Ag, I think that's a big deal. You got to start somewhere. Oh, in Goal 1 in the report, you heard John Munsell just talk about the forest farming community practice. I think that's a big deal. We're starting to have these multi-state agroforestry working groups, the Chesapeake Bay group, which Tracy's with, MOG that you've heard about, Jerry and others here. Pacific Islands, we've had a working group there of sorts. Agroforestry is a whole different deal in the Pacific Islands. And the Pacific Northwest had a workshop in May. I don't know if they're going to form a group or not, but I think these working groups are of some importance. We documented USDA supporting agroforestry demonstration sites. We have a lot going on with Canada between the National Agroforestry Center and the Agroforestry Development Center in Indian Head, Saskatchewan. Interestingly enough, our two centers have kind of a common history of our origins in the Great Plains and the Dust Bowl. Some really great folks up there. And then here we go, the first Agroforestry Academy. So that's mentioned in the report. 69 agroforestry research projects were supported, 200 peer-reviewed publications. We have an agroforestry module added to Forest Assist. Any of you heard of Forest Assist? Farm Assist? Go to Forest Assist. Type it like this and look at the agroforestry module. That's a resource for you. I'd be curious to hear your comments on that. Are any of you even aware of it existing? Well, that's good. We mentioned this. This, I think, is, in fact, there's copies of it here. Profitable Farms and Woodlands, a practical guide in agroforestry for landowners, farmers, and ranchers in the Southeast. I'd be interested, have any of you looked at it over there in the side table? I think that regional agroforestry guides could be useful. I don't know what you all think, but national guides that my center does have utility, but it seems like feedback we get, Rich, people say, well, we want to know about specific plants, trees that for our region. These national ones are too generic. So this one here, and it took a lot of work to get this done. It was working with a whole bunch of land-grant universities in the Southeast, and University of Missouri was supportive of this as well. But I'd be curious whether you think that's useful or whether something like that would be useful here or Tracy in your region. In fact, it was interesting, we got some calls from New Jersey and Maryland that wanted copies of the guide, and I said, well, it was written for the Southeast, and they said, well, we don't care, we don't have anything like that. So anyway, okay, we're getting here to the end. So this is Andy's closing thoughts, and I do want you to react to any of these or speak up. But this is, well, what's it going to take, you know, to take agroforestry to the next level? So I've told you about a bunch of stuff we're doing in DC. Well, some of this stuff is not DC, it's you and it's others. But this is a desired outcome we have in the strategic framework under Goal 1. Landowners, managers, tribes, and communities adopt agroforestry practices resulting in, you can read it, improved water, soil, and air quality, sustainable ag, product diversity, and rural wealth. Well, Andy thinks, you know, we don't even have statistics on this, but it appears that maybe agroforestry is on less than 1% of the suitable land. Seems to me it ought to be on 5%. You know, we don't want trees everywhere. It's got to be the right trees, the right plants in the right places, Doug, right? But there's certainly a great deal more land where agroforestry could be applied, a lot more suitable land, and that's the challenge. So how do we get there? How do we get to this next level? Well, you heard me this morning, eliminate agroforestry illiteracy. You guys have got to have your elevator speeches, you know, so that you can spread the word and have people, at least at a high level, understand what agroforestry is. You don't want people continuing to say that agroforestry is a Christmas tree plantation or a hybrid poplar plantation or it's converting farms to all to trees. We've got to have people more literate. I think there's got to, and so I'm not going to read all these, but these are the 5, and I'm going to go through each one a little bit. So we need this critical mass of resource professionals like you. I'd like to see these academies expanded to the Mid-Atlantic. The Chesapeake Bay is going to apply for a grant. The Southeast, the Northeast, the Northwest. I said this morning, and I believe it's in your packet, a commentary on this idea of a national certification program that Shabu and I and Mike and Bruce, is anybody else there? I think there was like 10 co-authors. So if you're this certification idea, I'm not saying it's easy, but read that when you get a minute. Any of you thought about certification, or I asked you that this morning. What do you think about that?
I would love it because I want to become certified through SAF. However, I don't think their certification is me because I am not timber management. I am forest product management.
Right.
And I look beyond the timber sales. I look at what can I get out of it.
Right.
I would really love to see this go.
Well, and you know, it's so many of these things are you build something and will they come, but yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm a certified forester. I was grandfathered in the beginning, but I took the test just for grins. They offered the test at a convention, and it had very little to do that even resembled agroforestry.
The closest thing is how many acres are in a section.
Yeah, I mean,
after that it was like, oh yeah, those other forestry classes I took.
And there are certification systems for urban foresters. The ISA does the what is a certified art? I forget the name of the. And there's certified crop advisors. So anyway, that's Andy's dream, and I think others here agree. And somehow in USDA, I'd like to see us have a basic, those of you that are in USDA, you probably shudder at the thought of another Ag Learn course, but it is a way to communicate with a large audience. And there is an Organic 101 course right now that's available, so we might do something. So, the significant expansion of agroforestry, research, education, extension at universities. The University of Missouri is incredible what's been done here. And I think Shabu would agree, we've talked about this. I think we need some keystone, cornerstone land-grant universities in some other parts of the country that are advancing agroforestry, that are offering major certificates, areas of expertise. These regional working groups, I think, are of some importance to keep people together like you guys. I hope after this week you'll make acquaintances, you'll stay connected, you'll form these networks that Mike was talking about so that this lives on. It's continual learning from each other. And I think a lot of talking about this idea of tribal agroforestry, island agroforestry, which is really different. You go to the Pacific Islands, it's not windbreaks and shelter belts, and they may not even use the term agroforestry, but this integration of trees, crops, and livestock has gone on for a long time, and the same with American Indians. Some of these things. So it would be it would take a different shape, but we're talking about, we've had some dialogue with the Pacific Islands and also with some of the tribal relations folks in DC about something like that. Peer-to-peer learning, landowner to landowner, professional to professional. Rich and I and others have talked a good deal about this very recently, and maybe I'm obsessed with it, but I think agroforestry demonstration sites, having places where people can see what it looks like. Maybe that's me, but it seems like the light bulb comes on when you can see it. You can have all the lectures in the world. So having demonstration sites in every state, strategically located, maintained, and used. Mike?
I want to make a comment. When we did this training in 2006, one of the things that I talked about, and it gets to this, and we were trying to think in our own state, how do we accomplish that? So we've got a set of outlying farms and centers in most land-grant universities. This one, Missouri has them also, and again, Dusty's very involved in that. So there are 4 of the 16, how many do we have? 17, 14 outlying farms and centers from MU?
Something like that, but there's fewer of those that are actively.
So there's 4 that we have either a lot or at least some specific strategic agroforestry practice on, like upland buffers or silvopasture or something. And our concept then is there's the science, but then you bring landowners in to demonstrate the science, but then the idea is sort of nearby there, you want to get landowners adopting those practices so that when you want to have strategically located things, one, you come and see how do we do it on the farm, and then we go see how do we do it in reality, and then those are identified. Then we know that it just circles around these specific places, that's where we can look, and if we have a similar model in all the land grants, we can start finding these places and they're on the maps.
Yep.
So that's been our thinking here for a long time.
Well, I remember, go ahead, you have a comment? No, I was just going to, I never forget this. When I worked for NRCS, I went out with these guys in Virginia, and this really wasn't necessarily agroforestry, but we went down and looked at this riparian area that they had really restored. NRCS had worked with the landowner. It looked great, and so we got into this discussion about, well, is anybody else doing it? And it was, well, not right away, but what happened was that this was there for a while, and then the adjoining landowners were asking, well, what is that? What did you do down there? And they kind of slowly started coming over you know, and looking at it, but NRCS, it kind of was almost out of their hands at that point because they had gotten somebody to do it that was probably more of an innovator, you know, front leader person, but, you know, the others were more, you know, that wasn't the way they did it, you know, as far as rotational grazing and managing this riparian zone.
That's the example of Bear Creek out of Iowa State University. They worked with Ron Risdall and, you know, got this whole thing started in 1990, and it's just grown up through that watershed, and that's become it's got a national designation now as a site for riparian forest.
So this is, you know, yeah, it sounds like we're agreeing. And these communities of practice that you heard about, we have this forest farming community practice that John talked about. I think what you guys have accomplished is great. You've exceeded my expectations for whatever they're worth, but, you know, should we do something similar with the other agroforestry practices, or at least get started with another one? And what would it be? You know, would it be buffers? Would it be alley cropping? Would a community practice on alley cropping help advance?
Is there funding specifically set aside in the USDA for establishing demonstration sites through land grant?
Not specifically, but the National Agroforestry Center has helped a little bit. We've helped over the years, helped establish a few sites. The communities of practice, that was a partnership between National Agroforestry Center and National Institute of Food and Agriculture. We both put some money in and basically set up a project and then asked for applications. So no, there's no specific, but I guess my sense is, Rich, you should jump in if you want to say something.
I was going to say, there isn't any kind of agroforestry demonstration designation. So, and there's so little dedicated agroforestry funding. It's stuff that goes along with other mainstay dollars that go out there. So these, when we say demonstration sites, they're things that we know about today. Either SARE has funded through a landowner grant or professional development grant, or that we've been involved with, or an RC&D did, and so the idea, we still don't know if any of those demonstration sites, because many are on private property, not all public, do they even want to be known publicly?
Right.
Yeah, at some point they did, because there was usually when a unit gives money to help support the development of a demonstration site, that's usually follow up with some training goes along with that. But it doesn't say for the rest of your life. And so the idea on this is we'll have to follow up with these that we know about and find out how much information they want to be known publicly, and can they be contacted if they want people to show.
It seems like when applying for funding for such projects, oftentimes it almost seems like you're trying to tie it into water quality or something else, and you're not mentioning agroforestry, you're trying to sneak it by. It'd be interesting if you could just have some funding set aside for getting the practice out so you can go see it. To have something set aside so you're not competing with all the other things going after that.
Yeah.
Pool of funding.
I wrote a grant through the Conservation Innovation Grant
Right.
recently. I don't know if it was funded or not yet, but I too feel that pressure where I was trying to kind of, well, obviously this is going to affect water quality, so I'll mention the fact that it's going to affect water quality. Obviously I'll mention it's going to reduce soil erosion. But there was nothing saying, hey, we want a demonstration for a civil pasture project that other producers can see and tour, because I live in Iowa, and extreme southern Iowa is known as grazing area, but Iowa is a big state, and you're not necessarily going to drive 5 hours to see something unless you're really motivated.
Well, just my experience with with SIG, and those with NRCS can jump in here. It's going to be to address an issue. That's typically, how NRCS, implements SIG. At least that's been my experience. There have been focus areas like forestry or grazing, but it's usually about addressing an issue like water quality. So agroforestry is a means to an end. I don't know whether we'll ever see, I don't know. I shouldn't speculate.
There's no room to ask for that in the USDA as Farm Bill funding?
Well,
that's what I'm saying.
that's my last action item. I mean, there is no agroforestry does not exist in the Farm Bill right now, except in a very odd place. The word is there, but it's not defined, it's not explicitly authorized. Now, certainly NRCS provides a great deal of assistance in many states to implement, you know, one or more of each of the 5 practices. But there's nothing in the Farm Bill that says, thou shalt do agroforestry, or thou shalt, it's not there. Unless, you know, I missed it somewhere, and, you know, Bruce would have told me, I'm sure.
It's not that explicit.
No, it's not. So, but there's a lot that, you know, we do know there's a lot of programs that could support it. And we have a center, we have a national center that does agroforestry 24/7, and of course we have University of Missouri and others. So it's not, I guess what I'm kind of saying is, if any of you in this room have an idea for a demonstration site and you have a working group and others, you know, we'd like to talk to you. You know, particularly if it's something we don't think is out there already, and if it would be in a good location. And we are talking about, and I hope we do it, is trying to put all these demonstration sites that can be publicized, put them on the web, create a geospatial database so that you could see maybe these sites in Missouri. So if somebody was, and the Europeans actually are interested in maybe working with us on this idea of publicizing, identifying explicitly demonstration sites, agroforestry demonstration sites. Yes?
Jay and I just were discussing an issue that we're involved with in Illinois currently, and that's the rewrite of the national, or the state's forest action plan, or what
Right.
the reiteration of it is now.
Right.
For the state and private forestry, the Forest
Right.
Service. And perhaps a letter from maybe the National Agroforestry Center or something, or somebody within the state and private forestry, or the Forest Service. You know, it's not even in ours now. We just thought of it now. So maybe some template language or ideas. You know,
Well, we'd be glad to talk. I mean, the forest action plans, I know a fair amount about those. I mean, they're, as you know, they're developed by the state.
Exactly.
So
and
they're,
I think it's just giving the state that idea.
and we perused the state action plans for the word agroforestry. I mean, I'm always looking for the word. We all are, right? And it was there, I think, in the Great Plains states. It was in Alabama, silvopasture. Kentucky had riparian forest buffers, but I don't remember ever seeing it in Illinois.
No.
Or,
It should be
It
encouraged.
will be now.
It should be encouraged.
We just thought about it, but I mean, it should be encouraged, I think.
well,
Not the different
and you're in, are you Wade?
Yeah.
Well, you're in Illinois. Aren't you beating the drum on those guys?
That's what I'm saying. I'm helping every other state.
Sometimes it's-
We're gonna have it in there now that we just considered it. But we haven't considered it before.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's a good idea, I think, to outreach to other states and hey, let's.
Well,
Andy, I think what he's saying is how do you influence crop forestry to include it in their
Yeah.
guidelines?
Actually,
on their guy, well, it's at Stewardship.
It'll be in Illinois, I can.
Well, Kate's going to fix that little wording in there, right?
could you tell them a little bit about the forest stewardship plan?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think one of the things that, so we're connected, the National Agroforestry Center is absolutely connected to cooperative forestry, which is in the state of private forestry. And one of the things we're working on is trying to connect better with those programs. So something that came up recently is that in the forest stewardship plan templates, they're out there, there are, I think, 7 or 11 different resource elements that you can include. And one of them that they're including now is agroforestry and silvopasture. And they came to the National Agroforestry Center asking for help with what are example language or templates or other ideas that we can use so that when folks are helping people write forest stewardship plans and they get to the section where it says you can include agroforestry and they don't know anything about agroforestry, they
Right.
have somewhere to turn to say, oh, you know, this is what some landowner might want to include in that agroforestry section.
I mean,
It's just now happening.
yeah, and that's, I think that's great. I think though, on the forest action plan, is something that you finally brought up is, if it's not in the forest action plan, there's no way he can write a grant for it.
That's right, the
In order to go get
pass-through
redesigns.
grants.
I know. Well, you need a Tracy in every state forestry agency. No, joking here a little bit, but it's got to come, I think those things have got to come up.
I think that's a good and immediate avenue. If there's any-
I mean, this thing, you know, there's only so much we can do from DC, and one of the things I know we can't do is tell state foresters what to do. I mean, we can influence with things like this, and Scott Josiah, the state forester in Nebraska, was very involved in this, read it, provided edits to it, but he's only one of how many state foresters, you know, including the islands. So I don't know, we're there to provide you, to help you, you know, with words. If you can get an opening into influencing what's in your forest action plan, we can probably help you with words. You know, we probably know something about your state, what practices might be applicable there, if you don't already. So we're a resource to you.
Not to switch gears on you a little bit, but I got to thinking, you were mentioning the forest stewardship plan switching and using agroforestry. You know, we've switched to using the SMART program, or whatever the heck it is called now. And a big part of what I do is use those templates, and a lot of it is agroforestry, windbreaks, riparian forest buffers. And going back to your earlier goal of 5% of suitable land, with that program, when do you expect to start seeing data from that being generated from the U.S. Forest Service to know how much of this stuff is actually being applied?
Well, we don't have that. We're coming out with a, this is what we do in DC, we're coming out with another report about agricultural and urban forests. And that report is largely about highlighting the fact that so many of these linear forests are not inventoried nationally. They're missed because in the case of FIA, it's got to be an acre in size, at least 120 feet wide, X amount of crown closure. So, and the same thing, urban, there's a lot of trees in urban land, a lot of urban land with trees, and there is no national inventory of it. And yet those trees, as we all know, they provide values, they're being impacted by emerald ash borer and, you know, all these threats. They're hugely important, they're sequestering carbon or emitting carbon. So I wish I could tell you that, you know, I think if FIA is expanded, the urban forest will probably be inventoried first. But go ahead.
I was going to say, I think in the short term, your question is, I mean, I wish I could answer it too, and I know.
Well, I mean, there's got to be.
But I think I mean, I was talking to somebody about it the other day, and it's like in the next year, something like that. Because they are trying to, because I think they do see that explicitly as a way to get a whole variety of, using SMART to get a whole variety of different data that hasn't.
I do like the SMART program because you can go back in and constantly change things, add it, it was implemented this date, and once you say it's implemented, you know it's there. That's been planted to a windbreak, a riparian forest.
Okay, so that's a way to tally it up through.
I'm wondering if there was any foresight in how we're going to generate that data to know what agroforestry has been implemented just with the forest stewardship practices.
I don't know, Kate can put that on her list. And since she's just leaving DC, having worked for Co-op Forestry for 2 years, and is coming to our center now. So, but we're pretty connected to Co-op Forestry. We are supported. Our technology transfer program is funded by Forest Service Cooperative Forestry. So they know who we are. You know, there's no issues there. So you're probably ready to kick me out of here. We've talked about these things, so I'm just going to finish the slides. This is this national inventory. I think this is my last slide, but this would be, I mentioned this is something I think we need. And we made some attempt to get it done in this farm bill, and, you know, of course we don't have a new farm bill, but was pretty much told it ain't going to happen this time around. But I think we do need to get agroforestry at least defined and mentioned, explicitly authorized in a few key programs like EQIP, Stewardship, you know, maybe some of these research and extension programs, and perhaps even in the horticulture, organic ag programs. It has a place potentially in many of them. You're probably ready for Thank you for the, thanks for the dialogue.
Today is the longest day for sitting, so we're almost there. We're going to take a half an hour break. Dinner's showing up in the back. And then